Can we pray? Sesiyabonga baba, sibonga lithuba lekuthi namuhla sivukile siphila. Sibonga kusibekelwa nguwe Nkosi kunangomhlangano. Siyaku-invite ke Nkosi namanje sithi bani nathi satawudeliberata nge-disaster management plan yasezulwini, bani nathi sivula tingcondvo tethu nalabo labatawupresenta ababengcwele akube nguwe lokhulumako sikhone kuva egameni likaJesu konke lokhu sicela ngoba sethemba igama lelingadulwe igama onke igama likaJesu, amen.
Thank you very much. Before you is the agenda for today's meeting. What we are going to discuss today is the Disaster Risk Management Plan for Ezulwini Urban Area. I hope everyone is in the correct meeting. The agenda will be as follows: the opening, the mayor's remarks, presentation by the National Disaster Management Authority, the consultants from Institute of Development Management and Northwest University. Then we'll have a question and answer session. Then we'll close the remarks. I will try that we are here at least, we are out of this place at least by 10 a.m. because we did spend 30 minutes trying to get to the venue. So I'd like to welcome every one of you, all our stakeholders, for making it to the meeting today. I'd like to welcome the Northwest University consultant into the country, and welcome to Ezulwini, the tourist hub of Eswatini. I hope that you'll have a beautiful stay whilst you're in the kingdom. We'd like to welcome the mayorship, recognize the mayor of Ezulwini, Magebongi Lembilu, the councillors, Dr. Edmund Mazibugo. We'd like to welcome consultants as well from Institute of Development Management who are working in joint collaboration with the Northwest University. With the team from Northwest University is Professor Christo Kotie, Professor Livwane Namagonde, Dr. Sizwile Koza, Mr. Sbusiso Msibi, and Dr. Wisdom Lamini from a University of Eswatini. I hope I pronounced your name properly. What's missing there is Dr. Kolile Mapanga, but it shall come. We'd like to recognize the presence of the National Disaster Management Agency, who've played quite a very critical role whilst we're developing the management plan. We'd like to recognize the presence of residents, the ratepayers, who are very, very important, and today you'll get to realize why we are collecting rates and how some of the rates are used in the town. We'd like to recognize the presence of the business community as well, utility providers. We'd like to recognize the presence of municipalities that are here today. I see there's Ngwenya, there's Mangayane. We welcome you to the meeting. I'd like to recognize the presence of Ezulwini Town Council, management. I can see they are here. Thank you very much. Could you all give yourselves a round of applause for making it to the meeting? Just a little bit of background. We started this exercise in the year 2020. It's been quite a journey. Whilst we were preparing to have a disaster management plan for the town, a disaster struck. It was quite disastrous. We had to pause on a number of activities. Our consultants couldn't make it to the country because there were lockdown restrictions that were made by the government. So indeed, it has been a long journey, but we are proud today to say that we have gone this mile and we will be having the disaster risk management plan. But before we could conclude this activity, it was very critical for us to have the input from you, important and stakeholders, before we could finalize it. So today, we'll be having inputs. Nothing is cast on stone. You're still welcome to comment. You're still welcome to address issues that you felt have been omitted from the report. So we request that you please, on the question and answer session, let's have quite an interactive sessions. Let's have the inputs and the comments. Without any further ado, I'd like to call upon the mayorship Ezulwini prides itself to have a mayor who happens to be a woman and who is very passionate about women leadership in the local government. So I'd like to have the mayor, call upon the mayor to present her opening remarks. Please welcome her with a round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome all stakeholders to the meeting. Thank you, MC, for your wonderful remarks and making sure that you have welcomed our guests very well. Honorable Member of Parliament, I don't know whether he's here, Alan Stewart. Councillors here present, Dr. Mazibugo, consultants, Institute of Development Management and Northwest University, National Disaster Management Agency, residents, ratepayers, business community, Ezulwini Town Management, all protocol observed. Good morning, everyone. May I take this opportunity to thank you all, firstly, for agreeing to be part of this breakfast meeting. According to Disaster Management Act 2006, Section 34, every region shall consistent with the provision of this act and the National Disaster Management Plan, and in collaboration with the National Disaster Management Agency, among other things, ensure the implementation of disaster management policy, plans, programs, and procedures at regional, Inkundla, which is the constituency, and community level, and monitor such arrangements consistent with national local government reform and decentralization policy. To realize the transformative potential of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the municipality has affirmed that disaster risk reduction needs to be at the core of sustainable development. The progress on the implementation of the Sendai framework of disaster risk reduction is therefore progress towards meeting the sustainable development goals, which in turn can substantially build the resilience of local people in the face of disasters. There are several targets across the 17 sustainable development goals that are related to disaster risk reduction. Ezulwini Town Council has an integrated development plan from 2019 to 2049, which is a 30-year plan, which has two strategic objectives that speak to today's business, that is, Disaster Management Strategic Objective 8, and Safe Environment and Strategic Objective 9. Create disaster management plan. This shows how critical and of high importance is the outcome of the stakeholder validation process, which we are in today. We are having, it marks an important milestone for the town, and we are so proud of this achievement. Like Kolile has just stated that we only began in 2020, when the actual disaster, which was so unexpected, struck us. But however, the process started. So in 2020, when a tender was awarded, however, as you might be aware, COVID-19 struck and there were lockdown restrictions which delayed the project. The awarded consultant, which is IDM in joint venture with the Northwest University, could not collect data using questionnaires and other digital platform, had to be used instead. And as you may well recall, there was a lot of trial and errors during that time just to see how best or effective things would work. So hence the delay in the collection of the data. So the working from home and closure of business operation meant that the day population decreased, and so did the number of respondents to the questionnaires. However, the process continued up to where we are today, which is after 2 years. And we can safely say that Ezulwini risk assessment and risk profile, which is the floods, the wind, the wildfire, the landslides, and heat wave, has been completed. This profiling will assist the town to reduce risks and impacts of disasters and build the resilience for sustainable development. The vulnerability and coping capacity of the different areas within town were also assessed. Lastly, a response and recovery plan has been prepared for the town to respond efficiently to disasters. I would thank our consultants, the Institute of Development Management and the Northwest University, and also hope that the process will continue to yield more results as we implement it to improve the lives of the people of Ezulwini. I also hope that as participants in today's meeting, we are going to input to this disaster management plan. And like Goli has just mentioned, there is still room for improvement, for taking in more inputs. I hope you all enjoy the session. Thank you very much. Disaster Management Authority to just come take up the podium. Sorry, Kolile, just so that we start on the whole session, and then Kolile will come back and continue the program.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to observe all protocol from recognize the Ezulwini Town Council Mayor, the councillors that are present today, all dignitaries and VIPs, the leading consultants we have, which is IDM and the Northwest University, stakeholders, the business community of Ezulwini, and stakeholders of Ezulwini Town Council, and all protocol observed. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm here on behalf of the National Disaster Management Agency Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Russell Lamini, who could not make it today due to other pressing commitments. My name is Victor Matlalela. I'm with the National Disaster Management Agency as a Disaster Risk Reduction Programs Director. Today, we are here to review, validate the Disaster Risk Management Plan of Ezulwini. I would not like to repeat what has been said about the history where we are coming from on this process. But the first thing I want to mention is that we appreciate Ezulwini Town Council for taking this giant step of developing a disaster risk management plan and ensuring that they understand their risk as a municipality, and then joining the very few municipalities that we have that have disaster risk management plans. There are 3 global frameworks that the international community is currently pursuing, which is this Sustainable Development Framework. We have the FCCC, which is the Climate Change Agenda, and then we have the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which are very important in driving the development agenda within the international community. Among these 3, there is one common denominator which we must all understand. I wish we could understand from today going forward, is that all three frameworks, their main target is on reducing vulnerability. The main objective of all the three frameworks is to ensure that we reduce vulnerability. So today, we are talking about a disaster risk management plan for the municipality. The main issue is to ensure that you reduce your vulnerability to different hazards which you might experience. And this you will achieve by ensuring that you understand your risk, that you manage your risk. On the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, there is only one target that is due before 2030, and this is target E, which talks about all countries, all entities must have, and local governments to have disaster risk management plans or strategies. This target was due by 2020, before the 2030 agenda. So all the targets that are there are due in 2030, but this one was put before 2030 for the main reason that you cannot achieve everything without a plan. You cannot achieve all the other targets without having the plan or the strategy in place on how we are going to get there. Ladies and gentlemen, the National Disaster Management Agency is committed towards ensuring that we reduce the impact of disasters. And this we will do by ensuring that we have or we manage our risk properly. So we have just probably in the tail end of the last emergency which we had, which is COVID-19. If I may ask from the House, from the business community that is here, the different stakeholders, how much loss did you experience over these 2 years? What was the impact of the COVID-19 personally, to your institution, to your business? No one is raising up his hand. The reason is that because we do not compute our losses. We do not compute the impact of disasters to our economy. So we will say that COVID was here and now is gone. But tomorrow we're going to have another hazard. We need, in order to deal with these issues, we need to know and compute the impact, I mean the economic impact of these disasters on our economy, on our businesses, on our development agenda. Then we will be able to put up good strategies to deal with that. So it's very important that we understand our risk on this. Lastly, I want to challenge the business community today for Ezulwini municipality that disaster risk reduction is an important agenda that you must consider wherever you are and in collaboration or in support of Ezulwini municipality. We are not saying Ezulwini municipality should have all the resources to deal with all the problems that might experience. But we are saying if we are together with the private sector, we can be able to manage our risks properly so that we reduce the impact of the disasters if they eventually occur. So as I'm saying today, let's measure our economic losses. Then we will know how much we have to contribute towards reducing those the impact of those hazards which we might have. Ladies and gentlemen, you might also want to consider a risk management plan for your business if you are within Ezulwini. Understand that if you can experience a certain hazard, what are you going to do? We will see that today we have the consultants, they're going to present probably a voluminous document which with a number of steps to be undertaken. But I would want to say for your business, if you are within the town, you can have the most brief risk plan you can have, that will just ensure that if this hazard occurs, what are the steps I'm going to take, which direction I'm going to go. So it is an important pillar that we understand our risk and we manage our risk going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the speakers that have been here, the Mayor and Mr. Victor Mahlalela. We do hope that in the future Programs Director, as we are left with the tantamount task of implementing the Disaster Risk Management Plan, NDMA na utawubuka naye esikhwameni ukuthi financially, how can we be supported as a council? And I like that Mr. Mahlalela encouraged all businesses that please do come through and partner with the municipality. I would like to recognize and welcome the Honorable MP of Lobamba, Babe Allen Stewart, who is here. And also importantly, welcome our virtual participants. We welcome you all. We hope that you are going to also enjoy virtual breakfast whilst we are continuing with the program. The time now is 8:25. Before we get to the gist of the business of today, I'd like to invite all participants and stakeholders to breakfast. We will take 15 minutes break. Can you please help yourselves to breakfast? You can just dish your breakfast and quietly come back to your table. We'll be continuing with the presentation and other people will be eating. It's 8:25, and can we all then begin the program once again at 8:45? Please enjoy breakfast. Bon appetit. 1, 2. Can I call the House to order? Can we proceed with the business of today? At this moment, I think it's very important for us as a town to understand the disaster risk so that we're able to reduce the risk, and particularly their impacts to the town, especially to our businesses, in partnership with our utility providers as well, so that we can minimize the downtowns that we can have. And importantly, to be able to build resilience as a town. I think we have spoken a lot about the COVID-19, and right now we are trying to build resilience, and it's very critical as a town to work together in partnership to make sure that how do we do that, as we know that there are ripple effects in terms of the social ills that we've witnessed after the COVID-19. We've seen quite a lot of job losses. Ezulwini is a tourist destination, which was highly affected by the COVID-19, and we've seen a lot of our brothers and sisters losing jobs, and as a result of that, we've seen quite an increase on the crime index. So we need to make sure that we're well prepared for such, and make sure that we have disaster management plans that will enable the town to prepare itself much better, and to make sure that after any event of disaster, we're able to build community resilience. Moving right on with the program of the day, we'll have the consultants presenting today. The first presentation will be done by Professor Leviwane Namakonde, who will provide an overview of the project and the disaster risk management, and how they did the methodology, and what were the findings. The presentation will be in two folds, so please do pay attention. Please note comments and questions that you may have, because after this session, we are going to have the question and answer session. Professor Namakonde, as you give him a round of applause, please come on the stage.
Thank you. Where is the? Will you be controlling the presentation from there? Thank you. Honorable MP, who is amongst us, our Honorable Mayor, all the councillors who are present here this morning, municipal officials, and all the stakeholders who are participating in this meeting or this workshop this morning, with all protocols observed, ngiyanibingelela. Ninjani? Hayi nami ngiphilile. As they've already indicated, that's my name there. I'm Leviwane Namakonde from Northwest University in South Africa. Originally, I come from the northern parts of South Africa, which is Limpopo. So, ndi muvenda, ndihamba chivenda. To start off with, maybe let me latch on to what Vabe Mahlalela has said when he was presenting here. Just to touch on one important issue, even though he didn't say it in so many words. There is a simple saying that goes around that disaster risk management or disaster risk reduction, it's everybody's business. Disaster risk reduction or disaster risk management, it's not a sector on its own, but it cuts across all the sectors and all the sectors of the society. So let's get involved in whatever way that we can in order to address the issues of disasters. Before I latch on to my presentation once again, it is really encouraging, and it was encouraging for me to see all the support that the municipal officials have from their political head, which is the mayor. It has also been encouraging to listen to her in her opening remarks, and how much crude she eats in terms of disaster risk management. That's very, very encouraging for some of us. I mean, we have worked in different parts of the world and we have seen that in most cases, disaster risk management or disaster risk reduction fails mainly because there is no political support. So having such a political support with the mayor and all the councillors in this municipality, I think we should consider that a good blessing. And keep the good work, Ms. Mayor. We really commend you on what you are doing. As I've indicated, in most cases, such political support is lacking. It's not there at all. And one way that we see it, it's because in most programs of institutions and municipalities, DRR issues are dealt with as peripheral issues. They are not funded. So whoever is responsible for DRR matters must scramble to get funds to run their programs. And once again, I'm saying it's encouraging to see the involvement of the mayor, who can also have an influence in terms of the allocation of these needed resources for DRR. Much has been said about COVID-19, I won't go back there. But for me, there is two things that COVID-19 has taught us. Number one, in dealing with disasters, we have to be anticipatory. We must put anticipatory mechanism in place. We don't know what major disaster is coming our way, but we must be ready, we must try and anticipate. Number two, we have to be proactive in dealing with issues of disasters. And I think today we are in one of those steps of being proactive in putting the plans in place. Particularly not focusing only on response and recovery, but on issues that we must address before a disaster happens. So I'm gonna quickly run through the process that we have gone through in this particular project. My presentation is gonna be 2 in 1. I'm gonna touch on the overview of the entire project. And then the second part, I'm gonna look at one of the volumes that we have produced, which is volume 1, which focuses on governance and institutional issues. And then after that, my colleague will carry on with the other presentations. You can go to the next slide, please. By way of background, I think this is no-brainer. We all know about this, we have seen this. Disasters are quite on the rise in our region and anywhere else in the world, and particularly in our region, those of hydrometeorological origin. Those are influenced by the climate and weather are on the rise. And we have noted in our study or in this activity that there are a number of hazards that faces, and I'm not going to touch on that as my colleague will focus on that. But in most of the situations, these hazards, when they are combined with issues of vulnerability and lack in terms of coping capacities, when they manifest, they become huge disasters, even if it's a small kind of a hazard, but its impacts become so huge. And in Ezulwini specifically, we have observed that the risk of disasters is very high. The issue of vulnerability of the communities and the infrastructure within the region to the number of the hazards that we have identified. The issues of socio-economic nature mainly makes people more vulnerable. Our high population growth issues plays a major part in that. And I hope in here we don't have skeptics. Climate change is really playing a role in increasing these hydrometeorological hazards and turning them into disasters, particularly through extreme weather events. I mean, in our region, it has become a norm these days that from Madagascar, Mozambique, we will have cyclones hitting us around January, February. In the past, it has not been so frequent, but that frequency is increasing. And we are seeing that, nearly every year. So indeed, climate change is playing a role in terms of increasing these extreme events. What is very, very important is that the information on hazards, the risks, the threats, if we know and we have information on that, then we are on a good path to risk-informed development. The availability of data through assessments, it's very, very crucial. And in this regard, I will encourage that what we have done with this project for the municipality must not be the end. Actually, it's supposed to be the beginning of a very long road that we must travel. Particularly of importance is the fact that we might all know that hazards and vulnerabilities are not static. They are always changing. Somebody might be in a vulnerable state today and for whatever reason, tomorrow they might be out, and somebody who was not vulnerable, they become vulnerable. And as I've indicated in terms of the hazards, the frequency, the magnitudes are also changing. So in this regard, we will be encouraging the municipality that between 2 and 5 years, they must repeat this process of doing disaster risk assessment. It must not be a once-off activity or exercise. Let's repeat this. Let's update our hazards. Let's update our vulnerabilities, and let's look at issues of coping capacities if we can put interventions. I'm not going to dwell much and get deeper into the issues of vulnerabilities. I mean, most of us, we know that it's those issues that turns hazards mostly into disasters. And by the way, most of those are beyond the scope of disaster management, because you will be talking about issues of, poverty, people being uneducated and all those things. And those are the things that makes people vulnerable to these hazards. And it needs all the society. It needs all the sectors to be involved, and the different sectors to take their responsibilities and role, in reducing those vulnerabilities. The objectives of this particular project, I have summed them up in 2. And the first one was to assist the town council in identifying all major disaster risk. And this is in terms of hazards, and prioritize those hazards, the issues of vulnerability and coping capacities for all these that threaten life and infrastructure here in Ezulwini. And once we have done, then the second part was to help the municipality to come up with the disaster risk management plan. And what we have tried the most to do in coming up with disaster risk management plan is to align it with the Sendai framework. It touches on the 4 priorities of the Sendai framework, and we have identified some roles and responsibilities or activities for the municipalities. And maybe just to add on what Babe Mahlalela said earlier on about the 3 main frameworks that we are looking at internationally. Let's not forget our own that is being championed by the African Union Commission, the Agenda 2063. And that touches again also on issues of how we deal or how the continent is planning to deal with all these issues of vulnerability and poverty, unemployment, inequality, and all those issues. So let's also look at that particular document as well. Our tasks emanating from the objectives was to conduct disaster risk assessment. We assessed the vulnerabilities, we assessed the hazards, and the coping capacities, and then that led us to the profiling of Ezulwini, and over and above that we have mapped the priority hazards, where they are located, because it's very, very crucial to know who is sitting next to which hazards. So we have mapped that, and once again we have tried by all means to develop a very comprehensive plan, which you will see as I. In terms of the deliverable, the first deliverable, as with most of the project, was to submit an inception report, which has got to do mainly with our understanding of the assignment. And I think we have done that quite earlier in the project, and we got the feedback from the municipality, and then we had to adjust that inception report. Then the second deliverable was to conduct the disaster risk assessments and then submit the risk profiling and mapping. And then after that we developed, but I should say that due to complications that have been there, we didn't do this stepwise. So, you know, whilst we are working on risk profiling, we were also working on the other chapters of the disaster risk management plan. In terms of the methodology, just to briefly touch on that, we used a mixed method research, which ultimately was more quantitative biased, if I can put it that way. Originally, we thought for such an exercise, it would be good to have a mixed methods research that is qualitative biased, because you get to interact with people, you get to get the emotions of people and their feelings when you are interacting with them face to face. But due to challenges of COVID, as it has already been indicated, we couldn't do that. So we had to go and focus on online semi-structured kind of questionnaires that we used to collect the data, and purposeful sampling was used to select mainly in terms of institutional arrangements. We used that. And once again, due to these issues of lockdowns and traveling and not being able to meet face to face, there was very low participation in the data collection, such that we felt that we needed to come up with a plan to address that. And fortunately, at that stage, some of the COVID rules were being relaxed a little bit. And through IDM, then we had to identify people who had to go around, you know, consulting with people to get even more data, because the data that we had collected through online, we couldn't use or we couldn't analyze it because the responses were quite low. Then, as a result of this low participation again, we came up with a deliberate effort in schools. And in the end, we had a total of 245 respondents. And at least we could be able to analyze the data that we have collected through these stakeholders. And in terms of analyzing the data, we used descriptive kind of analysis, and that was supported mainly by some kind of thematic analysis of the issues that we already know. And the entire process resulted in 3 volumes through the guidance of the municipality and the NDMA. Initially, we had 1 full report, which was very, very long, if I can say it myself. Then we ended up breaking it down into 3 volumes that are manageable and easy to go through. We've got volume 1 that I will present next, which focuses on governance issues and institutional arrangements for DRR in Ezulwini. Then we've got disaster risk assessment and risk profiling that my colleague will present. And volume 3 focuses on response and recovery. As much as we are promoting the issues of disaster risk reduction or disaster risk management, or being prepared or being proactive, it is still crucial that we are ready in case a disaster happens, because disasters will always happen. Hence, we have come up with these response and recovery plans for the priority hazards that we have identified for the municipality. So if one goes through that hazards, they will see what needs to be done and what needs to be in place, in order to respond to a particular hazard. What is very, very crucial is that in volume 1 and 2, and I will present some of this next as well, there are recommendable actions that must be carried out by Ezulwini municipality in the short, medium, and kind of long term. And these are more preparedness kind of activities or issues that must be dealt with before disasters happens. And as indicated, volume 3 provide guidance on disaster response and recovery activities, what is required, what must be put in place, who needs to be in charge. So all those are covered there. Now, if I can move to the second part of my presentation, even this one I've tried by all means to summarize as much as possible. We were advised that it mustn't be a very long kind of presentation, but it gets difficult, to decide how short must your presentation be short, because you are dealing with an entire volume here that is divided into about 4 chapters. So how short are you supposed to be? And to start with, more especially because of the kind of the political support and senior management support that we have seen, we felt that it will be befitting to open our volume with the messages from the council chairperson and the CEO. So you can read all that in the first volume, what they have said and their views on the entire process. And again, this particular volume provides a summary of the entire work that we have done in terms of the data that has been collected and the 3 volumes. Then we've got, as I indicated, I have about 4 chapters. Number 1 is introduction and background, and it gives the context of the entire study. It gives information on Ezulwini, the mapping of where Ezulwini is, the land use, different land uses that are here in Ezulwini. You can find all that in the background and context. Then our chapter 2 focuses on constitutional, legislative, and policy provisions. This is very, very crucial, as it has already been indicated. There are international frameworks and there are national and local level policies that is informed, disaster risk management or the work that we have done. So we felt it good that we need to present that. Then our chapter 3 focuses on institutional arrangement for DRR. And I think this is one of the most important chapters again of this entire exercise. particularly because we have made certain suggestions. And really people or the municipality must take this as suggestions. They might not be able to take action at the moment, but they must really think about this. And one of the main issues that came up from this study is the fact that the municipality does not have an official who is qualified in disaster risk management. Disaster risk management is being dealt with under, environmental health? Under environmental health, and even within that, there is no speciality or somebody who is specializing in that, and I'm gonna touch that probably in the next slide. Once again, one of the issues that we experienced in terms of this was the poor participation by the officials. And maybe I should raise our displeasure to Madam Mayor, who is here with us. Your officials did not assist the process. We shared with them a questionnaire to collect institutional data, but only a very few participated in that exercise for whatever reason, we don't know what, but at least we managed to come up with this chapter based on those who responded because they gave us their genuine responses. Again, very, very important is the fact that we've got these actionable recommendations in terms of staff, in terms of coordinating DRR issues, in terms of funding for DRR, in terms of policy, and all these are either in short, medium, or long term. And this particular volume also touches on cross-cutting issues such as gender. I mean, at the moment, it's one of the main issues that is being discussed. Gender mainstreaming into DRR, it's very, very important. I mean, we know within our societies, gender plays a major role in terms of what one can do and one cannot do. So we touch on the gender issues, the issues of data management and record keeping. It comes out as well as part of cross-cutting issues. And the issues of awareness and advocacy are also highlighted in that. Now, I have decided just to add a few actionable recommendations that we have. And unfortunately, my colors are not appearing on the screen, but we have color-coded these activities. When you revisit the volume, you will be able to see this. The issue of skills, capacity, and development of the current staff. And on the document, that is highlighted in red, meaning that it's very, very urgent. We are saying this because we don't have anybody who specializes in DRR within the municipality, but those who are in environmental health, they need to be capacitated probably through short course training on DRR issues so that they can be able to address DRR issues. In the medium to long term, we are saying that even if it's one official, the municipality needs to recruit somebody who specializes in DRR. And then lastly, in the very long term, which is beyond 10 years, we are saying that it will be very good if the municipality can establish a standalone DRR unit for it not to be under environmental health. Because obviously, if it's under environmental health, still most of DRR issues will be clouded and they might not come out very, very clearly. And then a second set of recommendable action is in terms of budgeting. We are saying in the long term, think about providing budget codes for DRR or to have a budget for DRR, and not only for response, but for preparedness activities as well. And then the issues of local level institutional coordination, which must be at the moment spearheaded by public health and environment. There is a need to have some form of a coordinating structure within the municipality that will deal with all disaster risk management issues. And at community level, we are encouraging that we need to establish ward committees if there are wards within the municipalities. And one way of doing this is to try and identify people within these wards who's got interest in disaster or environmental issues, and then we can engage them. Chapter 4 focuses on DRR, and in line with the 4 priorities of the Sendai framework, then it sets out some of the priorities that the municipality must look at. And then we have an outline of targets that are in line with the Sendai framework and the plan of action of the African Union Commission. And what must be noted here is that these targets are for national level, but we have decided to include them because data that feeds into national level must also come from our local levels, and they need to be aware of these targets that have been set in the Sendai framework. And then in this chapter, we also outline some of the structural and non-structural measures for addressing priority hazards. We have come up this after we have conducted the hazards assessment, and we have looked at measures that can be put in place. I'm not going to go into detail into one of them. Again, one of the issues that comes up very important is the early warning. At the moment, yes, early warning might be coming from national level, but we need to establish communication mechanism on how this information is filtered to the lowest level. Very, very crucial. And second to that, I think we need programs in terms of awareness and advocacy on explaining what early warnings is all about, and if it's color coded, what each color means, so that communities can be able to react once a warning has been issued. We have seen many times that warnings will be issued, but communities won't react for the lack of the capacity. They might not even understand what that warning is or what it's all about. On the other hand, we have seen in most places that what we are calling warnings, it's weather forecasts. And we are saying, let's move away from weather forecasts. Yes, we will still have weather forecasts, but let's have, early warning systems that also allude to the kind of impacts that might happen if that particular hazard manifests. So let's try and move away from such to to impact early warning systems. And then what is very, very important is that in this volume, it provides mechanism for the implementation of the measures that we have suggested. And these are linked to the actionable recommendations. As you will see in the next slide, this outlines the strategic area of intervention, the priority action that must be taken, the outcome indicator of that, the time frames of when must this be implemented, and the responsibility in terms of who is responsible for what. And at the moment, throughout the entire document, the question of responsibility or the column on responsibility, it's not yet completed, and we will really encourage the municipality to think really hard about this and decide who must be responsible for what, because we can't have a plan that doesn't have names attached to it. If it doesn't have that particular action, it's not going to be taken. And if it's not taken, who do we take to be accountable for that if there is no name. So we will encourage that. Let's be brave, let's put the names on there so that we can hold people accountable. I don't think I will run through the entire table, it's a bit long, but this is just a few examples of how that implementation matrix looks like. The issues of institutionalizing disaster risk assessment, we have already said this, that it mustn't be a once-off thing. It must be continuous, and to have that as continuous, then there must be a budget for profiling. Then we need to develop and institutionalize programs to monitor the hazards. I've indicated earlier on the changing nature of hazards, in terms of frequency, magnitude, in terms of spatiality, where they occur, so we must be able to monitor that. And that must be accompanied by issues of exposure, who is getting exposed and who has moved away from being exposed. Then we need to document, synthesize, and promote the use of indigenous knowledge on risk identification. This is one area that I've got passion for, and I can talk almost for the whole day, in terms of this. But one very good example, to be quite indigenous and traditional, and there is a lot of knowledge that is vested within our elderlies, within our communities. Through observing nature, be it birds or ants or whatever, they know that a certain event is about to happen. And let's tap into that knowledge. It will really help us when we combine it with this scientific knowledge. The issue of scientific or establishing or strengthening DRR databases, it has always been argued that for risk-informed development, we need to have data, we need to have a disaggregation in terms of the losses that we are experiencing. Mr. Matlalela touched on this earlier on. If we don't know the impacts of these disasters, how do we address them? How do we come up with programs and plans to address them? So we need to collect that data. We need to have a database that captures all this information. As I've touched, harnessing and integrating knowledge into what we are doing, it's very, very important. You can go to the next slide. I have touched on issues of multi-hazard early warning systems as well. Then there are a number of priorities. And as I've indicated, there is time frames. Maybe you can go to the slide that has got institutional arrangement, because for me that's the most crucial. The issue of institutionalizing DRR. And maybe from the stakeholders who are here, you can help us if the targets that we are setting are not feasible. We are saying that for the municipality to establish a DRR unit, they must be able to do this at least by 2030 or immediately after 2030. 2022, it's almost over. Remember, we have started the process in 2020. So we had suggested staff recruitment, at least one person with DRR qualification by 2022. We might need to revise that. Maybe we set it for 2025, but your guidance will be very, very important. In terms of capacity development and upscaling of the current staff within the environmental health, particularly on DRR issues, we are saying it must be done annually. Maybe one of the challenges, I'm not sure if by then IDM and whosoever is trying to come up with the courses will have the courses. I understand there is a challenge in terms of short courses that people can attend in terms of that within the country to try and upgrade. But I understand there are processes that are taking place. I'm correct? Am I correct? So there are processes. So yeah, annually people must be capacitated through this. And if there is a great need, as we are in partnership with IDM, we can assist in this facilitation of this training if there is a need. I mean, as the Northwest University and the ACDS, we've got our own programs in terms of short course programs that we run, and we can assist in terms of that. In terms of providing budget to implement DRR, we are saying annually. And with this, we are saying that even if it's still within environmental health, there must be a budget for DRR. If it's not clearly demarcated that is DRR, it will be very difficult to tap into that. And the issue of establishing a stand-alone budgeted DRR unit 2029, 2030. And then the issue of policies, the formulation of policy in terms of DRR, we are saying by 2027 that must be there. One of the issues we understand is the growth that Ezulwini is having in terms of business, in terms of residential areas, and with that taking place, it will be very, very crucial to have DRR kind of bylaws or bylaws that somehow incorporates issues of DRR. And we can assist in terms of this as well if we are called upon to help. So yeah, those are some of the issues that are there on the actionable plan or on this implementation metrics. As I indicated, it's quite a bit long, but it captures all the issues that we deemed necessary to be included, and they emanate or they are linked with the priorities of the Sendai framework. I thank you, Program Director. I will pause there and then I'll hand over to my colleague.
Morning, everybody. I think Prof. Livo already said a lot at the beginning of his presentation. So I'll just say thank you for the municipality for this opportunity, and just want to congratulate as well Ezulwini on its disaster management plan. Within the region, it's not commonplace for a lot of municipalities to have disaster management plans in place. So it's really a feather in your cap that you've taken this proactive step. So you can feel very proud. But as we're saying, this is still a work in progress in a sense, and we need your inputs into the final document as well to just kind of get it to where it needs to be. So the first place where we started was, can we please go back to the previous slide, is to do a disaster risk assessment. As was mentioned earlier, as part of the Sendai framework, the first outcome of the Sendai framework is to, oh, okay, sorry. I always kind of get confused whilst I'm talking and having something in my hand as well. It's like I'm a man, I can't multitask. So the first part of the Sendai framework is to look at understanding disaster risk. And this is what we did during the disaster risk assessment, is to get that foundation into place. Because once you have this in place, you can much easily plan and have accurate plans in place to actually prevent disaster risks. So as part of disaster risk assessment, there's various things that we look at. And there's a small calculation that we do and things that we have to look at. First, we have to look at the hazards communities are faced with. And in this aspect, we look at the severity of hazards and the intensity of hazards, and also how regularly they happen. So talking with the participants in the survey, we identified various hazards within Ezulwini. And we asked them to rank them for us in terms of their regularity and also their impact. Now, important to note within this methodology, in terms of those two categories, we put more weight to impact, obviously, because that relates to how many lives are lost, how many infrastructures lost, how many economy is lost. But also regularity is important. But you'll usually see in terms of regularity, people would say hailstorm or lightning storms happen more regularly, which is a common occurrence. While something that like severe flooding happens less often but creates more of an impact. So this allowed us to rank then top 5 hazards within Ezulwini. And this is again where we need input from you. So this is what we got from the participants, and as Prof. Levu said, there was issues in terms of participation. So this is our informed estimate from that. But obviously, if we get inputs from participants that say, oh, we don't necessarily think this is the best, we'll consider those inputs. But obviously then we looked at things like floods were seen as the major hazard within Ezulwini, followed by lightning storms, hailstorms, forest fires or wildfires. We commonly refer to that as veldfires, and then also pollutions, issues of pollution. So whether that's water pollution, air pollution, and there's all these type of things. But we also, apart from just identifying hazard, we also try to look at how do we start to prevent these things and what can Ezulwini do? And as Prof. Levu explained, we try to put this in actionable steps and within certain time frames. So we talked about Ezulwini having to identify the top 5 hazards and also looking at which communities are most affected by those hazards. And those are things that have to happen within the next year or two. That has to happen. So we identify exactly which communities are at risk so we can find ways for interventions to be made to help them. And those are more moderate to long-term things. So between 2 and 5 years. So you can see those are things. A next aspect we also have to assess usually is issues of socio-economic vulnerability. Now, theoretically, vulnerability is divided into 5 categories. So we look at different things. We look at physical vulnerability. This looks at the proximity of people to certain hazards. So how close do they live next to rivers or dumping sites, exposing them to pollution and so on. So that's one category we look at. Then we also look at things like social vulnerability. Social vulnerability relates to the involvement of gender communities in disaster risk reduction, also the participation of vulnerable communities within disaster risk reduction. We also look at political vulnerability is another aspect we look at. So here this is usually to do with issues of political will. So Prof. Levu again highlighted how important political will is in the process of disaster risk reduction. So this is something we also try to measure. So what was participants' perception of the political will in Ezulwini for disaster risk management? We also look at issues of economic vulnerability. So this looks a lot at issues of poverty and unemployment and how rife that is within a certain community and people's perception of that. And then also we look at issues of environmental vulnerability. So this looks at issues of climate change, people's experience of that. Also environmental degradation, so resource uses, whether that's deforestation, if it's improper land use and agricultural practices, we try to measure that as well. I think it's also important to note that because of time delays and also the inability necessarily to interact with communities, we had to use proxy indicators for all these things. In all these categories, you can measure hundreds of things. Within communities. And it's usually easier when you sit down with communities to explain each of these indicators much easier. So we had to keep it a bit more simple. But we do think these proxy indicators serve as a good indicator and a good platform for actually doing the assessment. And in subsequent assessments, the municipality can definitely build on these things. Now, important to note is also we put all these things on a scale from 1 to 5. So if you get a score that is close to 5, it's necessarily a bad thing. It's almost like golf. Like the lower your score is, the better it is. But the higher your score is, the worse it is. Right? So that's how it works. And so in all those questions, we ask people to rate their perception of that thing from 1 to 5. And that is what gives us that score, 57 out of 80. So the maximum score you could get is 80. Now you'll see in a couple of those indicators, the municipality got very high scores of vulnerability. So in terms of physical vulnerability, people felt there's a lot of communities that live in very hazardous areas. In terms of economic vulnerability, people felt there's a lot of unemployment and economic strain in the area. And I think this is also blown out a bit by COVID as well. So that had a lot of impact on the economies of many countries in many areas. But especially economic vulnerability was seen as, back to the previous one, sorry, and then environmental vulnerability was also seen as something that's very bad in the area. So yeah, that's what gives us the perception of vulnerability within Ezulwini. Now, yeah, so we'll see in terms of if we had to put that on a scale, we'd say Ezulwini is characterized by high levels of vulnerability, socio-economic and political vulnerability. And you can ask yourself now, is that the community I live in? Yes, no. And as we said, we welcome all inputs on that, if that's an accurate categorization of Ezulwini. So we also talked about how we can actually start to reduce these risks. And again, we logically prioritize those things in red. So those physical vulnerabilities, moving communities away from places like floodplains or flood lines, people that settle next to rivers or next to dumping sites, moving those people away from those areas, and obviously working with community structures to facilitate that if it's possible. Then we also look at issues of social vulnerability, and again, that's to ensure just the participation of vulnerable communities like youth, the elderly, the disabled, in disaster management activities. Because often these people are excluded from that, and their voices aren't heard, and that makes it difficult to actually plan to help them. So those are things that we're looking at improving. And that's all. Another aspect we also look at is improved disaster response awareness or disaster management awareness programming as well. Is very important. So that skills base within the community needs to be built so that we have more resilient and risk-aware communities, so that they know which is safe practices to engage in and when they have to evacuate certain areas when danger is approaching. We also have to look at issues of political vulnerability. And again, this is just getting identifying political councillors and making them champions of disaster risk reduction, and also giving them training on why it's important to be involved in disaster risk reduction. Issues of economic vulnerability, that's a lot more complex, but it's a big problem. So we have to find ways to alleviate poverty. And this links to what Prof. Levu was saying again, in terms of disaster risk being everybody's business. The municipality alone can't alleviate issues of poverty. This is where the private sector is needed. We have national government departments as well that have to start to get involved and actually start to alleviate poverty and try to create job opportunities, because that will allow us to reduce some of these crucial vulnerabilities. And then we also look at environmental vulnerabilities. So apart from reducing disaster risks with this kind of disaster management planning, we also have to have climate change adaptation plans. Again, climate change is a reality in the region, and we'll be affected more, especially in this area as well, by tropical cyclones and so on in future, and heavy rainfalls. And we have to have these kind of plannings in place to plan for that. And we also have to develop environmental management policies and ensure that those are also implemented, to ensure that the environment people live in is also stable. Another aspect we looked at is coping capacity. So coping capacity is a realization that people aren't necessarily helpless in the face of disasters. They have existing socio-economic levers in place within a community to help each other through times of toughness. And again, this is also seen during COVID. Usually, the thing people could rely on more is their immediate family and their community structures, more so than necessarily always governments. That close bonds is usually very important. And you'll see this is very much the flip side of vulnerability. So just as we have social vulnerabilities, political vulnerabilities, we also have those things on the other side. So here we see in terms of human capacity, we talk about people's skills to actually manage disasters. The municipality scored quite low, actually. Here people didn't necessarily have the skills and the knowledge of disaster risk management necessarily to deal with disasters, and that's something that needs to be improved. In terms of financial capacity, there's also low financial capacity. So there's not necessarily savings in place or access to insurance to deal with a disaster after it's happened or when it's happening. So those are things that can be built. And again, there's also traditional ways of saving for hard times. And those are things that we can explore as well. How do we use this traditional knowledge to our benefit as well? We'll also look at social capacities. And there we can see there's moderate human capacity within in the region. So that's one thing that's a positive. And in terms of physical capacities, there's also good physical capacities. So people do have access to some resources that if they're going through times of difficulty, they can sell certain resources to get through that time. Or they have land where they can produce food to get through a difficult time, to sustain themselves. And then also we look at things like natural capacity. So here we could see the municipality actually landed kind of in the middle. There is a certain level of capacity within the community to cope with disasters. So it's not a terrible situation to have. Yeah, so we can just see that we're in the middle of the scale there in terms of coping capacity. So this is the small equation I referred to at the beginning. So once we've calculated all the scores, we could now do a little small mathematics and just see we can divide the vulnerability score with the coping capacity. And that puts the municipality at a score of 3.8 out of 5. So we're at a moderate disaster risk. So again, there's a lot of vulnerability in the municipality and we're faced by several hazards, but there seems to be a starting point in terms of coping capacity to actually deal with disasters. So that's a very positive thing that the municipality can build on in terms of making communities more resilient and more safe from disaster risks. Now, in terms of the hazard assessment, we also didn't just stay with these kind of technical assessments. We also wanted to give the municipality tools in terms of actually showing where disaster risks are. Now, I must say the lights kind of distort the mapping. So that thing that looks yellow is actually green. The most of that map is actually green, and there's yellow and there's red. So usually in disaster management, we work like a traffic light. Green means go, and that's fine. Yellow is okay. You can still get over the line, but you shouldn't risk it. And red means stop. And this specific map was done just to indicate the susceptibility of the municipality to flooding and which areas specifically are most at risk. And if some of the details, so we can see the rivers in the municipality, and around that we put buffers from 10 meters from the river to 30 meters from the river. So all kinds of settlements or houses, all the black dots are individual houses or where people stay. When that's indicated in red, it shows that specific house or specific business is in an at-risk area. So it should either be moved or there should be some mitigation measures be put in place. Because that's also something we recognize in disaster risk management. You can't necessarily because people have already settled in an area, and it's a very political thing to get people moved from an area. It's not easy necessarily or it's not as easy to say it's just we'll move people. But we have to start mitigating the potential impacts people will face. And there's various things that we can do. We're not helpless in the face of disaster. Important part of this map as well is it also highlights a lot of the business infrastructure in Ezulwini. It also highlights where hospitals are, where schools are. So you can see what the proximity is towards the hazard. And it helps to orientate the municipality in terms of that. Who and what is exposed to flooding. And this was another map as well. So it just shows for the different hazards that we were talking about earlier. to actually map them and show where they can cause problems. So this one was specific for wildfires, and we can see it's more away from the town, and it's more maybe towards where there's agricultural areas or forested areas, where there's a potential for fires to start. But obviously, you can also see how close that is to the city. So it can start there and spread into the town as well. So it's important to understand people's proximity to risk and also plan for that. So with these tools, there's various other maps as well, which the municipality can use and you can consult at your own leisure to see. So that was a bit of the perspective from Volume 2. What we try to do. So it's just to understand where risk is and who are affected by it. But as was mentioned earlier, we also understand that it's important to have response mechanisms in place and also disaster recovery plans. So although we say in disaster risk management, we have to emphasize preparedness, you also have to plan for your response and your recovery. That's also being proactive in a sense. And that was the focus and the intention of Volume 3. That's what we try to achieve there. If we can just... So, again, all these things are very interconnected. So when we talked about identifying those priority hazards within Volume 2, we dragged that over to Volume 3 as well. And we tried to say, identify which is the high priority the hazards, moderate priority and low priority hazards, and then identify specific response and recovery interventions for each. Now, how we structured this document was to look at specifically which institutions within the municipality should be involved, who should take primary responsibility for this activity, and again, as Prof. Livu said, sometimes those boxes are still unclear. It's not that someone's necessarily taken responsibility. But it's important going forward that there is a definite commitment, either if it's the police, fire department, municipal disaster management in future, someone has to take responsibility to make sure that these things get executed. We also try to look at specific activities linked to both response and recovery that the municipality can take following a disaster event. So it's a nicely laid out plan. Again, it was something that was developed over time and not necessarily on the ground. So these things can change as you guys give input to the document as well. But it's important to understand what activities we can take and what resources we need to also respond to disasters. So that's also something that's mentioned. What specific resources are needed? And that means then the finances and everything can get put in place beforehand to ensure that when a disaster strikes, we have everything at hand. And that way we can save lives. So that was just a brief overview. So just to say what the purpose of the volume was, we wanted to look at how the municipality can more efficiently respond to disasters within the area. So basically streamlining that and having almost what they would call in business, a business continuity plan in place for when disasters happen. Then we also looked at how can the municipality or maintain their operability during a disaster. So again, so that a disaster doesn't make that normal municipal function goes out of the window. So that service delivery continues, but that you also handle this disaster situation at the same time. So how do you balance these things? And this is what this plan also tries to look at. And then also how do we try to return to normality following a disaster? So how do we do that quickly and efficiently? The longer we take to respond to disasters, the more expensive it gets. And that's not just economically, but also in lives lost. So that's a very important thing. And the more we do planning, the better situation we are. And just the final recommendation that we were looking at is, again, and this links to taking responsibility for certain activities. So the best way to actually manage disaster is to have a basic incident command system in place. and people that work in fire or in the police will already understand this kind of structure. But this is something the municipality has to adopt as well in terms of how it handles disasters. And it also various role players, not just people from emergency response units, but also from the public sector, from NGOs. They can also be kind of part of this type of structure. Because there's a lot of expertise in the region that you can draw on. Community members can also be part of this. So a key recommendation then for us is that Esselwini establish what we'll call a disaster response and recovery team that's comprised of various role players. And they all have a specific function within that structure to do when a disaster happens and to make sure that communities are safe and there's a return to normal as soon as possible. Okay, and that's the end from us.
Please give them a round of applause again. Thank you so much for the presentations. I hope as stakeholders we now understand the intense work that has been done on the management plans. I'm also tempted to go around the table and ask if we're still together and if people were listening after such a lovely breakfast, whether everyone, if we are on board. The two professors have said quite a lot, and thank you for unpacking the thick documents that we as an office, when we're reading it, we had to come together in the boardroom to read it together because it was really difficult to go through it when you read it alone. Dr. Livuane is sending us to disciplinary. But let me just clarify that management did respond on the questionnaires, Mayor. There was one important thing. We have developers that we invited today and one that have their construction projects still underway. They haven't completed them. And I think you mentioned something quite critical in terms of how the disaster management plans are critical in informing development. We talk about climate proofing of such buildings, which is very, very critical. We encourage as a council that we should review the documents every 2 to 5 years so that we make sure that the hazards that have been identified are not static. And I must say that, yes, we are quoting challenges of COVID-19, but also on the other hand, I think this document was most informed because of the challenges that were ongoing on the ground, because of the disasters that were ongoing on the ground. You'll also remember that whilst we were preparing the document, there were also political unrest that happened. So those have also been captured in the document, and how best, because we talk about service delivery as a town. So it's highlighted on how we can prepare our services, how we make sure that our services are not interrupted when such disasters strike. There was a comment on having focal persons within the wards, and we're happy that we do have councillors that are dedicated. These are the focal persons that communicate with the residents in the respective wards. So we do trust that we are going to have committees that will talk to disaster management, because it was also highlighted that in terms of awareness, there's a shortage in the town. People are not really aware on what is disaster, but we had to have the reports first, and then now we will take the report and make sure we disseminate it to the communities. So thank you so much for that. That's just a summary. Do we have any utility providers in the house? I'm just tempted to put 1 or 2 people on the spotlight before we go to the question and answer session. Please allow me, just to make sure that we're still on the same path. Just a reaction from you on what does it mean? Esselwini has completed their disaster management plan. What does it mean for you as a utility provider? What are your responsibilities in terms of this disaster management plans? Stu.
I'm very happy to see what has been put in place by Ezulwini municipality, and I think it's very good. And okay, what I have seen from my side is when I was looking at the areas that have been looked at and identified, there is more leaning towards the natural disasters and likelihoods. Probably would want to see from my side in the document what do they have to deal with issues like power lines, proximity towards power lines, because those are areas where you could also have disaster when those power lines actually fall down. And then from our side, pipelines, we've got some serious pipelines that are running through Zulwini, 250, 500 millimeter sized pipelines. So I would also be interested to know what if those have been identified as risk areas, because if those burst, one of them is carrying a lot of pressure because it's coming all the way straight from Babane. So you want to make sure that the people that are in the vicinity of that are aware of that particular pipeline and what a pipe burst could likely mean to them, and also then make sure that we have in place those strategies to say if that happens, how do they get informed, how do they react to whatever might happen, whether it's buildings could be flooded that probably might not have been identified as flood areas because they are far away from rivers, but now because there's a pipeline, there's that likelihood of those buildings being flooded. So to make sure that those particular buildings are structured or built in such a way that they are able to handle the flows that could come from those pipelines. I think from my side, that would be my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We almost missed such a critical comment. One more utility provider. I know EPTC. Are you in the house? Please don't hide. EPTC? Okay, perhaps they've left. Mr. Stewart, we have a filling station on MR 103. What does this mean as a business community? What does a disaster management plan mean? If they've identified hazards of flooding, for instance, what does it mean for your business? What does it mean for the community surrounding your business?
Where do I start? Well, it's an eye-opener for one. As I say, a lot of people here are not for me, and it's something to look into. I can't really answer her question directly, but some thought needs to go in, more thought needs to go into disaster management, especially in my kind of business. It's a filling station, and we are prone to robberies, disasters, like fire is a real hazard to us. When there's a fire around us, we panic because our stuff is so flammable, and so fires are a real danger to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please give him a round of applause. Just one more reaction before the question and answer session. Remember, you took 30 minutes of my time, so I'm adding 30 minutes. A quick response or reaction from the municipalities. There's a municipality that has completed such a huge project. What can you learn? What are your comments?
Thank you. My name is Pumzile Shabalala. I'm from Ngwenya Town Board, which is one of the smaller municipalities. I think we did indicate when we came here that we came to copy what Zulwini is doing. So that was our intention for today. But we have also learned a lot. We are in the process of doing our own disaster preparedness plan. And we do have similar risks as indicated in the Zulwini's plan. And we have learned a lot. We will be working together with the Zulwini and together with the NDMA to ensure that as local authorities we do meet the deadline, Mr. Mahlalela, so that by the end of maybe next financial year, we would have finished our own as well. But we have learned a lot. We are aware that as local authorities, we need to identify the risks, and we need to make sure that we don't put our businesses and our people under vulnerable conditions. So we will be following suit. Zulwini, thank you so much for today.
Thank you. Please give the round of applause for the commitment they'll be doing. So I'll be starting now with the question and answer session. Please make sure that you're the first one to raise your hand because I have limited time for the questions and answer session. Are there any questions? Quite a lot has been said today. Are there any questions or comments that you'd like to contribute? 3 questions. I'll start with the CEO, Mangayane. I'll follow with Mr. Stewart, and then Mr. Dlamini from EEA, and lastly, the CEO from Ngwenya Town Board. So please direct your questions. When you are asking, can you just at least direct whom are you asking the question so that they can be noting the questions in that order. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Program Director. My name is David Madlopa from Mangayane Town Board. Thank you so much to Zulwini. We have set the pace. I must also confess that I've also come here to see and copy and learn because we have already started with the NDMA, putting together some processes to develop same. Thanks so much to the consultants for doing such a wonderful job. Myself having a little bit of disaster management background, I fully understand what you went through. And my question will be, as much as I understand clearly your objective, my question is directed to Professor, the first presenter. As much as I clearly understand the objective number 1, that to me seems to confine all the process within the urban area. I understand that spatially or geographical, any study must be spatially defined. But again, were there any efforts made to reach to the peri-urban areas? The reason I'm asking this is because what affects most of the activities and the pressures and the problems that affect towns comes from the peri-urban areas. Were there any efforts made to reach to those areas, maybe to identify, because you will find that we adequately prepare ourselves within the urban boundary, only to be hit by disasters coming just outside the urban area. So that is my first question. My second question will be, you have highlighted on the issues of land allocation as far as town planning scheme is concerned. Were there any efforts made maybe to integrate these 2 processes or these 2 plans to avoid a situation where you will find that the town planning scheme has zoned a certain area to be residential, yet that particular area, according to this plan, it's red. It's a no-go area. So to avoid this kind of disintegration within the same institution, were these documents taken into consideration? Because you find that, I know Zulwini a little bit, but you find that, as we have also said, some houses are right within the floodplains. Maybe the town planning scheme allows that, because if we had it our way, maybe we would have started with this program so that the town planning scheme will be based or will be amended. If there is a need to amend or revise the town planning scheme, let it be. My question is, was the town planning scheme considered before this process was finalized. Thank you so much. Oh, one more thing. I've seen that the overall disaster risk assessment is 3.8/5. That is beautiful. So we need to make sure that we do not slide, we do not go back, we improve. Thank you.
Hi. Okay, Mr. Madlopa, or peri-urban areas really have an impact on the town, and you cannot leave them out. But as Alwinis, I think all towns have the same issue. The town is run by the municipality, and then the peri-urban or peri-urban is run by another council, the Tinkundla system. They also need to be engaged together with the towns to come up with, to help with these plans. And I think the environment and NDMA need to be involved when it comes to dealing with the Tingundla councils, because it's very important to bring them into the picture. Without them, there'll be no success. And it's no point in getting the town boards to engage the Tinkundla system without the support of the environment authorities and the national disaster authorities. It gives them more strength, let's put it that way. Anyway, on another thing, there is this one is actually directed to water services. A sewage line has been put into Zulwini, it's a couple of years old now. And that sewage line is not maintained. Why? There is a disaster happening as we speak right now, right opposite the head offices of water services in Zulwini, by the bridge down here. Sewage is overflowing and spilling out into the river. Do you know about that? Another thing with the sewage line, cockroaches. There are so many cockroaches in Zulwini now. Is there any maintenance or anything that is being done by water service to try and control this thing? Putting some chemical in the sewer pipe, and how often do water services inspect these sewer pipes? As I say, a disaster is happening right now. And that is not the only part. I think there's lower down in Zulwini, there's also overflow of sewage. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, some of my questions have been highlighted by the previous speakers, but let me start with what Mr. Stewart has just said. I'm from the Environment Authority. One of the issues that you raised there, that one of the risk or whatever hazards, it's pollution. I was going to talk about the sewer line that has been installed, and it follows the contour, therefore it is at the lower ends towards the water courses. So my point was on the mitigations that relate to that, because that affects the community downstream. And being from the Environment Authority, you know, disaster management becomes a battle against the formidable forces of nature. everything that is disaster, basically we're fighting against nature. And we are fighting against God's anger towards us in modifying what He gave us. Therefore, my submission is that if I know you have identified the Public Health and Environment Department or unit as the unit that must be capacitated and strengthened to manage this. I'm also adding another one. You know, when there is disaster, the corporate sector is the one that we go to in order to respond to that. And Ezulwini has become basically a corporate headquarters. All the corporates are moving into Ezulwini. So therefore, Ezulwini is better placed to coordinate and I don't know, for lack of a better word, because they are here, so a forum of some sort for them and to exchange ideas and to formalize or to have a forum where they can discuss in collaboration with a disaster management agency. And I'm not saying we should also be part of that, but I think on issues that touch on environment, the Environment Authority, we have a unit or some people who can also participate on that, so that to give the environmental perspective of that. I don't know whether it was a question or an input, but it's my submission.
Thank you. We'll take the very last question. Can we keep the questions short?
Thank you very much. I think I have one question and the second one is a suggestion. May I start with the suggestion first? I am still reeling with fear and shock, SWSC, with regards to the issue of the high hazard pipelines. I am thinking it's high time we map them and mark them so that we know where they are, and so that we, as local authorities, we don't place any activities on top of those, especially the vendors. Because whatever space we find, we think it's best for vendors, yet maybe we're exposing them to such hazards. So I think maybe as utilities and as everyone, we should start now mapping and marking these high hazard infrastructures that we have within the local authorities. And then my second issue is directed to Professor, first presentation. He talked about provision of budgets. I think as local authorities, we are battling with this one, Professor. Please assist. How best can we do it? I will not mention how we first started doing it, but at first we thought should we set aside a lot of money because we don't know how big the hazard is going to be and how much money we need to set aside. But what I'm actually saying is, how best can we deal with the issue of ensuring that in our budgets we budget for disasters, but we don't end up sparing or wasting money for other projects that we would be doing in case there are no disasters in that particular financial year. I think that's my question. If we could interrogate how best we can do it.
Thank you so much for the questions. I will now hand over to the professor to answer the so many questions that I've directed to you. Please answer them.
Thank you. I will answer a few. Maybe to start with, he's not here. I wanted to answer him first, and he has moved out. Anyway, I will start with the last speaker, particularly the provision of budget. I wouldn't have specific suggestions of what you need to do to start with. But in asking your question, you have also touched on something that I would say I disagree a little bit with. when you are touching or when you are pointing to the fact that how do you budget and you know, when you are not wasting for other services. In terms of disasters, you might budget whatever for all the projects that you have. I mean, this is common sense, we know this. And a storm happens and within 2 seconds, your money is gone the drain. It has wiped off everything. Alternatively, you could have put that money into mitigation measures, you know, of those whatever project or activities that you are having, and in a way, I mean, she talked about earlier on resilient proof kind of development that we are doing. And if we start moving towards that, definitely, you know, the main issue with disasters, and I think it touches on what somebody has mentioned, I can't remember if it's him or him, in terms of hazards, and particularly natural hazards. There is very little that we can do to stop them from happening. Very, very little. I mean, that's also common sense. If it overrains, flooding is gonna happen, and what do we do about that? There is very little for us to do anything about that. But what we can do is to make sure that we put measures in place to reduce the impact of those disasters. And once again, it will start with the issue of budgeting. My suggestion is, I mean, we know we are all living in a very financially constrained environment. But for me, as you are in the beginning of your journey, if you are able to provide budget for small things like, you know, awareness campaigns, sensitizing communities, that might not be. In that way, you are capacitating your communities. They know what to do when a disaster happens because they've been capacitated. And it's not gonna need millions for you. Have these, you know, advocacy campaigns within your communities, capacitate them, and they are the ones who are being mostly affected, but if they know how to react when a certain hazard turns into a disaster, then definitely the impacts there will be very much reduced. So my suggestion is, I'm not gonna pinpoint what or which ones, but within your own areas, you know, pick what I normally call the low-hanging fruits in terms of DRR that you can start with, that you can budget, whatever the little amount, and it can push you. Then over the years, you can build on that. And then definitely, you might have a good budget in the end. One of the issues, again, in terms of budgeting, we don't have to put strain on public budgets alone. It has been indicated here, the issue of the public sector. How do we involve them? How do we get them finance, you know, our programs? The NGOs, how do we get them finance? I mean, in most cases, once a disaster happens and there has to be a response, a lot of money will be available. Where that money comes from, you don't know. Why don't we spend that money for preparedness before a disaster happens? Why don't we make that money available, you know, for these programs that we need to roll within the municipalities? So I think it will be good to engage even other stakeholders, you know, to come on board in terms of the finances. I will go to the very first question and my colleagues will answer others. The issue of the first objective, the way it is. I have projected the objective as it is on the document you know, of the project proposal, and it was as it is. And I suppose due to resources, number one, it might be one of the issues. Probably the municipality might be in the better position to respond. But due to resources, I think it might have been one of the issues why we needed to focus specifically on the urban areas. And as we indicated earlier on, I mean, this should not be the end. This is the beginning of a very long process. And I suppose in the next step of this exercise, definitely the peri-urban areas needs to be included. Definitely we have to make resources available for such areas, and then we include them. I'm not sure if I'm leaving. Okay, I had a response for him, yes. when he was talking about us fighting against nature or God's anger or something like that. In disaster risk management, colleagues and everyone, we are in the language that we are using, we are really fighting that. And I want to highlight it to you now. As much as we've got natural hazards, we've got no such a thing called natural disaster. Let's refrain from this language. We don't have a natural disaster. And the reason we are saying that is because in the impact of all these disasters, what contributes most is the exposure and the vulnerabilities. And most of those are social elements. It's us people, what we do or omit to do in our daily lives. That's what turns hazards into disasters. If we subscribe to this notion of natural disasters, I mean, we will end up deciding, yes, it's God's will. We can do nothing about it and we just sit and we perish. So let's try not to subscribe all these things or ascribe all these things to natural disasters. Yes, we've got natural hazards. Most of the hazards that we face in our region are natural. Like I indicated when I started, most of them are weather and climate related. They are natural, they will happen. And as climate change and variability happens, their frequency and magnitude is also increasing. But to reduce their impacts, what do we do? Let's put preparedness measures in place in order to reduce the impacts of those disasters. I will pause there and hand over to my colleague.
All right. So I'll just talk about some of the smaller issues. I think a lot of issues raised when we talked about the water pipes and also electricity cables where people live, and we have to map that. During this process, one of the biggest gaps we had was with the mapping. Sure, we struggled with mapping for various reasons, and one of the biggest things was the lack of data. So mapping, like we see there, comes from the availability of data, so people capturing events when they happen. So if there's fires happening in an urban area, we can map where exactly it happened, how many people were affected, what was the economic impact. That should become a standard operating procedure for all fire departments, police departments, whoever is responding to an event, to actually capture data so that once we get to this planning phase, we can actually see where the trends are. But this is the big issue. So even when we're talking about these water pipes, these electricity pipes, everybody can talk about it and say where it is, but geospatially that data is not available. So it's impossible for us to map it. So when we say we need maps like that, then someone has to take responsibility for mapping that. And I think that's something going forward that the municipality really has to emphasize, the importance of mapping. So like I said, these maps are very useful, and you can show this to anyone. You can show it to community members, you can show it to officials. Everyone will immediately know where problems are and why it's important to respond. You see a big area that's in red, you know that means danger. So that's very important. So in terms of mapping data is very important. The other issue that was raised was the issue of town planning and integration with disaster management planning. So I'll be frank, so that was something that didn't happen necessarily, but it's something that should happen. Because urban areas are developing so quickly and the rapid urbanization is happening across the region and in all countries, that's something we need to plan for in future, that those type of integrations are happening. But that also means the policy mechanism should be in place, and there should be some level of policy integration that Prof. Levu was talking about beforehand to facilitate this. And because that gives the onus on people to work across their silos. Because we see this a lot. People within government departments, they work in silos. So I'm in environmental management, I'm in disaster management, and I'm just busy with my things. Whilst a lot of things interact. So this is where we have to start to look at ways to actually integrate this. And a good way, well, at least, I don't know if these structures already exist within in Swazi legislation on disaster management, but something that's worked in South Africa a lot was having disaster management advisory forums where you have people from various sectors of the private sector, you have people from urban planning, environmental management, and they get together and talk about disaster preparedness issues, where you can actually raise these kind of issues amongst each other. So if urban planning is saying we want to develop a new area, then disaster management can comment and say, well, we've done assessments in these areas and they're exposed to flooding, so maybe consider not doing that. So it's all the whole point of such a forum is to actually facilitate communication between departments on disaster risk management issues. So it's important to have these things in place. Let me just see. Yeah, I think that's about the things that I need to cover.
WSC. So I'll just give you 2 seconds to respond. I think there were issues on spillages of sewer. There were issues of the pipe being built on the lower ends, which directly go into water sources. So would you want to comment on that one?
Thank you very much. Perhaps 2 seconds is too small. This problem is very big. Maybe just before I even go into responding, I think one other area that I would have wanted to also ask you to look into as you do that disaster management is to also look at issues of slope stability. Because what is currently happening now in Zulwini is that a lot of development is taking place and we're moving soil from place to place. And that affects a whole lot of things. It affects the relief, it affects waterways and things. So if that could also be looked into as one of the areas, I think we would probably want to learn something from what happened in eThekwini, whereby when the rains came, slopes started failing and houses started moving. So we need to make sure that we have that in place. Now coming to my big problem, wastewater. I think one thing that we need to understand is that when you bring in a wastewater management system or a pipeline to try and deal with wastewater, what you're actually trying to do is you're trying to move one problem from people and bringing it into a system or a network. So there are certain things that you will only be able to deal with and mitigate. For instance, they're talking about the cockroaches and things like that. You will still find the cockroaches in the septic tanks that you will find that we bring the network to come and remove those cockroaches. We bring that network to come and remove the septic tanks from the homes and everything. So it's unfortunately one of those things that you find that you cannot really do away with. And probably dealing with cockroaches and trying to utilize insecticides, I think that would have more adverse effects on the environment than it would benefit. So we haven't looked at that particular issue or anything. But yeah, I think the issue is that when you bring in a pipeline to try and take away sewer, you are just moving the problem away from the people into the system. Now the thing is, when you design a sewer pipeline, you design it for a particular purpose. And unfortunately, people are people. You give people a road, you find them moving cows, you find them grazing cows in the road. The same thing happens. You build a sewer pipeline, which is designed to take away wastewater and other things that come from the house and the kitchens. But people go into the pipe, into the network, and what do they do? Start dumping dogs inside, they start dumping shits. Those things are not designed. So it's an issue of the design versus what it eventually gets to be used for. So it's the pipelines are normally designed such that they are low maintenance. They do not need us to keep going to go and inspect and see what's happening, because one, most of them, they tend to pass through people's properties. So you want to minimize the disturbance. You can only imagine if every month we are going through your property saying we're inspecting the sewer pipelines. So they are mostly designed and buried underground so that they become low maintenance. But what tends to happen is the people's activities, then people start doing, start utilizing the sewer lines for what they were not designed for. And then you find that there are blockages that happen, because what you find in there, we've seen a lot of things. Found bare sheets, we've found some places they've even found people inside there. All those are not things that are expected or supposed to go into the networks. So those things tend to block, and when blockages happen, you are then going to get disasters in terms of the waste inside the pipelines coming out. But now again, when that tends to happen, we are depending upon you as people, either as residents or even if you're passing by. You know, as water services, we've done so much. We've tried to put in toll-free numbers. We've put in WhatsApp numbers. We've also put in an app that you can actually download and utilize to report anything, whether it's a pipe burst, whether it's a sewer blockage. And once something has been reported, it's easy for us to then follow it up. What tends to become a problem is that people see a blockage and they're like, oh, okay, blocked pipeline, and they pass. Nobody tells us, because most of these, they don't, as I have said, you'll find that they are within people's properties. So until and unless people are able to tell us some of the problems, we will not be able to see. So we depend on you to communicate them to us. And then when you see us not responding, you can then take us to task again that we have spoken, we have told you, but you are not doing anything. So most of the time, we end up with these problems because we do not get feedback. And then there's the issue of a pipeline. I think that was not finished. That was made, but unfortunately it wasn't completed. And again, it's an issue of people, of communication, that when you have a pipeline, some people, when they develop, immediately they see a pipeline, what do? The plumbers, they do everything in the house, and they go and they connect you to the pipeline. Whereas it is the duty of water services to then come and connect you to the sewer network. So you find people then connected onto a pipeline that had not yet been commissioned. And it started having sewer wastewater, whereas it still hasn't been completed at the end. So what happens, because it doesn't go through, the wastewater comes in, and then eventually you start seeing it as it comes out. So again, it's most of the time people problems that cause what was designed to work properly not to work properly, which then gives us a whole lot of everybody else a problem. So I think from water services, what I can say is to request that please report, tell us whenever you see something that is not going right, so that we can then work and deal with it. And if you see us not working on it, report again, and then highlight, raise a red flag. Tell the municipality, tell environmental authority, we've reported this and they're not doing anything. And they will help us to quickly move and do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a comment on dealing with Tinkudla system. We know that municipalities are well organized for disaster management plans, but there's a gap. Who is supposed to deal with Tinkudla? Can I ask Mr. Mahlala to answer that one?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. One would like, before I get into the last comment from Kolile, probably, I think it will be for the benefit of the House that we understand that there are about 4 components of an early warning system, and one of those is communication or risk knowledge and communication capability. So I think on this particular disaster risk management plan for the municipality, the issue that ESWC is talking about of communications is a very important thing. So when the residents understand and know that this is a disaster waiting to happen because we have a pipe burst, then they should be capacitated to report accordingly. I'm happy about the mechanisms that they have put in place, but the issue is information dissemination. Now, for this particular plan, what it needs to be is that the application needs to be rolled out. When the municipality is going in to engage its residents, then ESW should be tagged along to say, we have an app, we have a reporting mechanism. This is, if you see a pipe burst, if you see this thing, this is how you report. And that way, that is how we will be managing our risk. Because what we are preaching as NDMA is, let's manage our risk accordingly. So communication and information dissemination capability is one critical component of an early warning system. Then we will be doing preparedness. Now, coming to the last comment, I think we all understand that we have our dichotomous system of Tingulda system and the local government. I think as NDMA, we had started engaging the municipalities, all the municipalities on that, and we are going on very well in that front. And we have also started engaging with the Tingulda on the other hand. I think from the meeting today, I'm taking the comment that now we should be engaging another gear as NDMA to say for the urban areas and peri-urban areas, let's try to engage now on the two systems together. Let's have a way to ensure that if we are within a local, a certain, or the municipalities, let's have an engagement whereby we are bringing in both the Tingulda and the local government together. So I think this is where we will be going. But at the moment, one can clearly say that the engagement has been parallel. We've been engaging Tingulda on one end, and we are engaging the municipalities on one other end. I think we will get to a stage later on whereby we're now doing the engagement together, where we're bringing the urban and the rural together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are virtual questions. I want to ask this ones. They're directed to Professor Livuane. What advice can he give on infusing the traditional institutional knowledge, especially in setups where storms, hailstorms, floods are associated with a number of religious, traditional connotation, like the seven-headed snake in the country? I don't know if you understand that, or any other belief. I'll just pose the two questions because they're almost similar. What advice can the prof give the professionals, since these traditional beliefs are usually outright discounted, in favor of what is referred to as scientific data or empirical findings? I won't mention who asked these questions, but I guess some of us in the house know who asked this question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm really not sure if I'm in the position to really advise on these issues. You know, from our point of view, more especially from an indigenous point of view, what we are saying is there should be complementarity between the use of two. But if one moves a step further into religious and belief systems of people, you know, it will be very difficult for me, to be honest, to comment on that. Because, I mean, we've got different belief system and whatever, tornadoes, it's a snake passing, blah, 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 and all those. And that's what people believe. And you might not necessarily be able to change people's belief systems. But what I've been trying to say earlier on, there is indigenous knowledge besides the beliefs. There is indigenous knowledge that has been used over the years before we adopted all these scientific knowledges. I mean, our great parents survived most of these disasters based on these knowledges. I mean, in terms of our plans, why don't we integrate that? Why don't we engage, you know, our elderlies and sort that information before they go away with the information? I mean, you could easily set up a situation wherein you sit with the elderly. What are the signs when we are about to have storm, for instance? I have conducted a study in Botswana where that traditional community will tell you, because these birds are nesting in the reeds in the valley this year, it means we are not gonna have rain, we might have drought. Why don't we include that into our scientific, our scientific information? Or this year they are not nesting, we can't see any bird nesting there. It's telling us we might have quite a lot of rain and we might get flooding. What we are saying is, let that information complement the early warning systems that we have, that is generated by scientific, methods. But I mean, like I indicated, when we talk religious beliefs and stuff, it's one territory that I will try and run away from getting into. I mean, we all have our own religious beliefs and stuff like that. So yeah, I might not be the perfect person to comment on that. Thank you. I hope I've answered those questions, or partially some of them.
Thank you. I'm closing the program. The time is 10:43. Just one burning question. Only one burning question. Someone who hasn't asked a question? Anyone who hasn't asked a question? The colleagues are leaving the country today. Okay. Okay. There's one burning question from Mananga Center.
Thank you. It's not a burning question, but probably an observation. So much has been said about COVID and everything. Have you attempted to have an urban local authority case study on COVID and let it be included in this exercise? Because it is still an ongoing challenge at the moment, and still we don't know how to deal with it as a community. So maybe if there are cases, situations where you can capture what has happened to us and how we can help local authorities to deal with as a case study.
Okay, thanks. I'm not gonna stand. At the moment, we haven't commissioned such a study. And, as you were speaking, I was just talking to my colleague here, just to say maybe instead of being a question, he is making a very good suggestion. And maybe if time is allowing, we could have in one of these volumes, we can do a quick study on that and have as part of this volume just a case as part of the first volume, maybe on how did we get through the COVID. I think that's a very good suggestion. I will take that as a suggestion, but we haven't commissioned anything. Oh, that's great. We will exchange communications and we'll take it from there.
Colleagues, I think we are closing right now. The CEO is threatening me. But let us call it at the end of the session. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your participation. Thank you for making it to the session. We wouldn't have made it alone, and I think you appreciate the work that has been done by the consultants. Thank you once again for that. And there's a huge task for us as a council, and we'd appreciate any collaboration and partnership, as it has been alluded. On my part, we will end the session here. We do have opportunity for colleagues and stakeholders to continue interrogating the report, to continue having input, and you can email your comments and input from today's session. We've included an email address. Please do forward those comments if you didn't have a chance to maybe ask questions. So there's still that opportunity for you to improve the document. And we did circulate the documents. Unfortunately, because of intellectual property rights, we couldn't share it in terms of the soft copy, but we do have hard copies that are printed out. One is at IGM in Matapa. The other one is available at our local authority offices. And the last copy is with NDMA at Mbabane. So there's one in Mbabane, Ezulwini, and Matapa for ease of reach. Please do go there and read those documents. And if you have comments, please forward. If colleagues, you could be kind enough just to stay like 15 minutes so that if there are engagements and they'd like to ask more questions, I know that you have to leave and go back home, but please allow for our colleagues and our business community to interrogate further on some of the issues. We would appreciate that. So thank you so much once again. I will delegate upwards. Thank you.
Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you for yet another productive meeting that we've heard. Thank you, my God, that everything that has been contributed, my God, to this exercise is going to be worth our while as a municipality. Bless everyone that has participated, and we pray for traveling mercies as we depart from this place. In Jesus' name, amen.